A reading from the Gospel of Mark. A leper walked right up to Jesus, dropped to his knees, and begged him for help. "If you want to, you can make me clean." Jesus was powerfully moved, and he reached out and touched the leper. "I do want to. Be clean." And at that very moment, the disease left him. The leper was cleansed and made whole once again. Jesus sent him away, but first he warned him strongly. "Don't tell anybody how this happened. Just go and show yourself to the priest so that he can certify that you're clean. Perform the ceremony prescribed by Moses as proof of your cleansing, and then you may return home." But the man talked everywhere about how Jesus had healed him, until Jesus could no longer come into a town openly without the risk of being mobbed. So he remained on the outskirts. Even so, people still sought him out from far and wide. Amen. I am a sinner. I am a failure. I am a leper. All of these are examples of the victim's story. Now, the victim isn't somebody who sits around bemoaning their lot in life. They're not the ones who sit around saying, "Oh, woe is me, why is all of this stuff happening to me? I'm so pitiful and miserable." The victim is the one who's very aware of what's going on in their life, of the burdens and challenges that they're being faced with. So, for example, you have the person who realizes that they have broken faith with God or broken faith with someone else, and so they're very aware of the sin that is in their life. And they share that quite openly, quite honestly, as they face up to it. There's the person who sees themselves as a failure, recognizing that they have fallen short of what they could be doing. Maybe a couple of years ago, when the people of Shakespeare Church got together to talk about what the future was going to hold before I came, you might have had a failure story. We've faced so many challenges. We've fallen so short. Things have been really difficult. Maybe we have failed. And that is the victim's story. But the leper also tells the victim's story. And he comes to Jesus and he immediately gets down on his knees and begs for healing. He begs for Jesus to make him clean, to release him of the burden that he's facing in his life. Now he does that partially because he thinks that's what Jesus expects of him. Jesus expects him to come and be lowered, be humbled, be groveling in front of him because that's what everybody else expects of him. As a leper, he's been cast out from society. He's been told he is no longer welcome. He doesn't belong. That he's unclean, impure. And there would even be the strong sense given by those around him, by those within the community from which he came, that it was his fault that this had happened. Perhaps he had sinned against God, and this was God's punishment against him. And so he comes to Jesus and immediately gets down on his knees and begs for healing because he figures that's what Jesus is looking for from him. He tells the victim's story. I am a victim of my disease, and it has caused me all of this grief and hardship. I am a victim of my disease, and it has brought me low to the point where all I can do is come and grovel in front of you. Because otherwise you won't regard me, you won't listen to me, you You will be like everyone else who just shuns me, who kicks me out, who throws stones at me to make sure that I keep my distance. I am a victim. I am a sinner. I am a failure. I am a leper. But the interesting part about this is that Jesus doesn't play into the victim's story. Instead, Jesus responds with the survivor story. He comes to the leper, or when the leper comes to him and begs to be made whole, he goes, it says, if you want to, in other words, if you're willing, if you can find it within your heart, if you have the compassion, you can make me well. But Jesus refuses to play that game where he sees the leper as victimized. And so instead he comes to him and he says, I do want you to be well. I do want you to be healed, but not because you have come and abased yourself in front of me, not because you have come and groveled in front of me. I want you to be well because you obviously have the strength within you to achieve that wholeness, to achieve that wellness in your life. He comes and he shares with the leper the survivor's story. The victim's story is one of recognizing the weight of the world placed upon us, the challenges and burdens that we have to bear as victims, as those who suffer through whatever might be going on in our lives. But the survivor's story is the reminder that we have indeed seen our way through those times of burden, those times of suffering. And Jesus wants to remind the leper of that. He wants the leper to understand that the reason he is there in front of him is because he is filled with the courage to come and ask for healing. That he is not allowing himself to simply be a victim to the way the rest of the world looks at him, but instead he is choosing to stand up for himself even while he is kneeling in front of Jesus asking for healing. He is standing up. He is being courageous. He is surviving through his leprosy. It would have been very easy for him as a leper to have fit into all of the social stereotypes that were required, gone and lived in a cave somewhere, isolated himself totally from anyone else, cut himself off from all human contact, avoided any confrontations that might be uncomfortable, that might cause him difficulty. But he doesn't choose to do that. Because even though he might be a victim of his illness, he is not a victim of his weaknesses. So instead, he chooses to come before Jesus, to get down on his knees, and essentially to demand from Jesus healing. To demand from Jesus to be noticed. And Jesus recognizes that within him, even if the man doesn't recognize it in himself. And the way that Jesus affirms the survivor's story within the man is he reaches out and he touches him. Now, whenever we talk about lepers within the sermon or within the Christian message, we often talk about the fact that Jesus reached out and touched the leper. But I can't emphasize enough how powerful that action is. I can't emphasize enough how truly profound Jesus' simple action is to the leper. Imagine living your life without any human contact at all. being totally cut off from the world around you, where even lepers who gather together really have no human interaction, no connection. All they do is sit around and share their victim story with each other. But Jesus comes and he reaches out and creates contact. He touches him. He touches him. Can you imagine what that must feel like? To have gone perhaps years without another human being touching you. How profound that would be. And he wants the leper to know by his touch that he has survived. You have made it through all of the difficulties and challenges that you have been faced with. You have survived. You have chosen to be strong, even in the face of great uncertainty. The same is true when we come to Christ as recognized as sinners, that we are people who have broken trust with God, broken trust with one another. And we come and, the idea, the tradition would have us coming and beating our chests and feeling great sorrow and shame and guilt weighed down upon us. And Jesus' response isn't to further emphasize that guilt. It isn't to further emphasize the fact, yes, you are a sinner. And you should be groveling in front of me, and you should feel ashamed, and you should feel saddened and sorrowful because you are such a terrible person. That's not how he responds. He comes and instead reaches out and touches us with grace. He connects to us in ways that communicate a spirit of love, a spirit of healing that comes from that. Imagine or think back on the worst sin you've ever committed. And I'm not going to ask you to tell me that. But think of that. Think about the one time in your life when you felt horrendously guilt-ridden, horrendously ashamed. And now think about the fact that you are here today in worship with God, sharing in a fellowship of Christians, sharing the love of Christ between each other. You are here because even though you have dealt with the sin in your life, you have survived. You've been strong enough to see your way through. The same is true if we ponder the most tragic events of our lives. The times when we have had to face immense sorrow. Perhaps a death within our family that was truly significant for us. Perhaps a great loss of job, loss of dreams, loss of relationships. But think about the fact that you are here today. You have survived. Those things have not destroyed you. They have not laid you low. You have managed to see your way through. Whether it is from the love of Christ that has continued to support and encourage you, the strength of God that has come to you, the strength of the community that surrounds you, it doesn't matter. You have survived. That is a survivor's story that we have to remind ourselves of from time to time. That no matter how ugly life might have been, we have survived. We have seen our way through. And we're able to come and carry on. But we don't just carry on as survivors. We don't just carry on as somebody who says, boy, we made it, that's all we have to worry about. This is where we come into the thriver story. And we see that in the leper. Once the leper is healed by Jesus, Jesus' response to him is, go to the priest and show him that you are made well. Go to the priest and show him that you have survived. That's what Jesus is telling him to do. Go and tell your survivor story to the priest. But the man doesn't do that. It says as soon as he was out of sight of Jesus, he started to tell his story. Look what has happened to me. Look at the changes that have overcome me. Look at how my life has been transformed by my encounter with Christ. And he tells the thriver story. He goes out with a new, renewed spirit of life and energy, with a hopefulness that he never thought he would have again, with a spirit of grace, a spirit of great joy and celebration because he has been made whole in Christ. And the thriver story is what we ourselves also experience when we allow ourselves to move from victim to survivor and beyond. When we recognize the power of Christ at work in our lives and are able to then free ourselves to live the fullness that Christ invites us to live. We do not limit ourselves to just being survivors. We made it. That's all I have to do now. But instead we rebuild. We recreate. We find new strength. We find new vision. We find new energy. And we go out and begin to be the people that Christ has called us to be. We do that as sinners when we come to Christ seeking forgiveness and find that that forgiveness has already been given. And then we go out in the world to live that second chance again. To live it with energy and with hope and with new joy so that we can share that love that has been shown to us with others. We live it when we come into times of failure within our lives and recognize that even though we might have failed here, we are still here. We are still capable. There is still potential, still possibility for us. And so as a church, we had times of failure, had times when we felt laid low. But we have also seen that we have survived, that our story is not just from a couple of years ago, but our story is century and a half long. And that story has a future to it, and it continues. And so rather than choosing to just be a victim and give up, rather than choosing to just be a survivor and carry on as if nothing has changed, we choose to be thrivers. We choose to allow Christ to work through us. We choose to be the presence of Christ within our community, Christ's hands in the community. That is a thriver statement. It's not a victim statement. It's not a survivor's statement. It is a thriver's statement. We are Christ's hands in the community. Because the only way we can do that, the only way we can be Christ's hands in the community is if we are thriving. Not just surviving. We are thriving through Christ's strength, through Christ's love, through Christ's grace, through the power and insight and courage that He blesses us with to then go into the world and share that with others. So that those who have a story that is of the victim can discover that there is a survivor story as well. And if they can understand themselves as survivors, they then have the hope to thrive. That is our calling. We have been victims in many ways and in many circumstances. But in every single one, we have survived. And then with Christ, with His touch, with His grace, we thrive and share that thriving spirit